Welcome to The Prescription, the Tax Policy Center's biweekly webcast on fiscal policy. This is one of a series of conversations with state, local, and federal government officials, as well as leading economists and other experts. I'm your host, Howard Gleckman, a senior fellow at TPC and editor of our blog, TaxBox. My guest today is Bill Hoagland, senior vice president at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Bill spent 25 years on the U.S. Senate staff, including 2 decades as a staff member and later staff director the Senate Budget Committee for then Chairman Pete Domenici, and later as Director of Budget and Appropriations for Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist. Bill Hoagland also was one of the first staff members of the Congressional Budget Office. Before we begin, a bit of housekeeping. We encourage audience members to submit questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This event is being recorded and will be posted online on TPC's website. We're using captioning, which you can adjust or turn off with the live transcript button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you'd like to join the conversation on social media, please use the hashtag #LiveAtUrban. And if you'd like to suggest a future guest for The Prescription, just email us at info@taxpolicycenter.org. Bill Hoagland, welcome to The Prescription.
Good to be with you, Howard. Thank you for inviting me.
Great to see you as always. So as we speak, at noon on October 28th, Democrats are scrambling to wrap up at least a framework of a massive social spending and tax bill. The effort raises a lot of questions about both policy and process. I guess the first question is, Bill, do you think that this is the beginning of the end game? Democrats actually reached some sort of a consensus?
That's a good question. As we speak, of course, the president is speaking at the same time about the framework that he's laid out early this morning to the Democratic caucus in the House. I think we're getting very close. We'll know later today whether or not he was successful in convincing the House caucus to proceed at least with a vote on the bipartisan infrastructure package. As it relates to the framework that he's laid out for finalizing an agreement on the broader what we call, I guess, the Build Back Better America plan, we'll have to see. I think he's laid out a very set of specifics that then further need to be refined into legislation. There are certainly going to be some people that are going to be upset that some of the provisions, such as paid family leave, are not in the package that he's laid out this morning. So it's still got a ways to go. It particularly has to get into legislative language and present it and voted on. I guess I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there's going to be an agreement at some point here on a Build Back America plan that he's laid out. It's not going to come quickly, though. It's going to take still some time. And I would assume that that will be, I'm going to say sometime before the holidays, and I'm not specifying the holidays, whether it's Veterans Day or Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or Christmas. I think there will be a package that'll be put on his desk before one of those holidays.
So my over-under has been Christmas Eve. Am I overly pessimistic?
I think you're probably pretty close to the truth there. Recognizing that even if they can pass this in the United States House of Representatives, after getting the legislation put together, legislative language, as you know, which is always the devil sometimes is in the detail, it will have to go to the Senate. And I can assure you, as an old Senate staffer, I would fully expect that it will be changed somewhat in some provisions that will require it to, if for no other reason, what we refer to, I'm not getting into the weeds here, something called the Byrd Rule, that there'll be provisions that will probably require it to be modified in the Senate, and that means it'll have to come back to the House again. So this is just, as you say, this may be the beginning of the end, but we're still a long way from the end.
Let me ask you about a couple of specifics that surfaced this morning. And one of them is the idea of an alternative minimum tax on book income of large corporations. Of course, this also includes a separate 15% minimum tax on foreign income of US-based multinationals. What do you think about the idea of a minimum book tax on a relatively small number of major corporations?
Well, the overall you're the tax expert and I am not the tax expert, but my first reaction is that this has been negotiated down a lot from where some members in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party wanted to be. I am not opposed to the 15% corporate minimum tax. I understand that is estimated by their figures this morning to raise about $325 billion. What I don't understand is that the interaction with the international reforms also, which sometimes, depending upon how it's written, can actually lose money, I think, going forward. So, but there they've claimed another $350 billion in revenues. In terms of the other provisions that you talked about, I don't take a position on it. Let me back up and say this is kind of hard for somebody that works for something called the Bipartisan Policy Center. This is not a bipartisan bill, as we know, and I wish it was otherwise. But having said that, I do give the president credit for the fact that whatever expenditures they are talking about, they're at least talking about trying to pay for them, whether these are real revenue raises or whether they're a little smoke and mirrors involved, which there is in a few cases here. At least I give them credit for saying we're going to try to pay for everything that we're talking about adding in the way of additional benefits out there to the American public.
Yeah, my sense, Bill, is when you contrast that with the infrastructure bill, where the pay-fors really did seem to be smoke and mirrors.
Yeah,
the pay-fors in this one seem a little more real. Is that your sense too?
I think it is real. I think there is one provision that you and I have had discussions about over the years, and that is closing the tax gap. I don't think there's any question that closing the tax gap would be a good idea, and I think it needs to be done. The difficulty is that I think they've indicated that they're planning, in terms of their overall revenue raisers, which are around about about maybe $2 trillion. About 400 billion of that is from from closing the tax gap. That one could be a little bit overstated. I don't know. It's always been a difficult estimate to make. But overall, you're right. I think they have worked very hard here to try to come up with as much as possible real revenue raisers to pay for this expenditures that they're talking about here. And that, again, like I say, I want to give them credit for, at least as an old budgeteer, trying to pay for what they're talking about in way of expenditures.
So Democrats are giving themselves a very short runway to vet and pass some pretty major changes in the tax code. Republicans did a similar thing with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. What are the pros and cons of trying to act so quickly to get very complicated legislation through Congress?
Well, I think there's the issues, of course, of putting together legislation that, and particularly in the tax area, that overburdens the people that have to implement the programs going forward. The IRS has got a lot of work put on their shoulders. Not just talking about the tax provisions, but also those particular provisions that may relate to such things as the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, all those other provisions that they have to implement, and particularly when they're implementing a child tax credit that is administered on a quarterly basis. So I think part of the problem with putting together legislation quickly and pushing it out is to think about the actual administrative implementation of this legislation in a way that doesn't further complicate and further make the process even more difficult for the average American to understand, or to increase the possibility of finding loopholes that wouldn't have normally been there to begin with. So I think it's very important to be careful in putting together any legislation, that you not think about just how it's scored by our old my old Congressional Budget Office or the Joint Tax Committee, but think about the process of implementing that legislation later on. And I think that's one of the shortcomings when you try to push stuff too fast, too quickly. And also, I will say the tax code, and I know I'm speaking to the Tax Policy Center here. I think the tax code has become unduly complicated and difficult, and being used to try to solve so many issues that probably would be better addressed through just straightforward spending programs, as opposed to running them all through the tax code and using the tax code as the mechanism for addressing some issues as it relates to family daycare or other issues out there. I guess I think that this is a trade-off between spending and expenditures. Or expenditures and tax using the tax code, but I think that we've made the process extremely complicated and particularly complicated to administer also.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where so much was left to Treasury and the IRS in terms of writing guidance and regulation, and they scrambled and did an amazing job, but it still took them a couple of years. And it looks like we're about to impose the same burden on them again.
Yes.
The other thing that's kind of fascinating about this is one of the arguments that Republicans made during the TCJA argument was, well, we had to jam this through in a short period of time because if we didn't, it would all get picked apart by the lobbyists. And now I'm hearing the Democrats making the same argument that we need to kind of get this through before everybody gets geared up. The problem, I think, in the real world, doesn't take any time for K Street to get geared up. They're already picking this stuff apart.
They're well resourced versus the IRS, so they can gear up a lot faster than the IRS can. That's for sure.
Exactly. What's happening here raises to me a very interesting question. A lot of what the Democrats are proposing to do is to pay for significant social spending by raising taxes on a relatively small number of people. And I think about what Europe does, where they have robust social safety nets, but everybody's taxed to pay for those services. And I wonder, what do you think about that? Should broad-based social reform, such as subsidies for nearly all families with children, be funded by just a handful of the very wealthy, or should they be funded by all of us?
Well, I'll probably get myself in trouble by saying this. I agree with you that it should be funded by all of us. This is a social welfare system that we're talking about, and that it shouldn't be only limited to just a select few that have to bear the burden of this. I personally think that the president made a mistake, I will say, by having this red line that nobody below 400,000 would have to see their taxes increased in this plan. Quite frankly, that to me is I think all of us can. Admittedly, those at the lower income, we have a progressive system. We should modify that progressive system in such a way that we all bear some of the responsibility for maintaining these services that we think are beneficial to a lot. And of course, people will benefit at the same time that they're maybe having to see their, but I just think this 400,000 red line was a mistake, and things that I would like to see done, such as, again, getting myself in trouble, I'm sure here, I don't see any reason why the gasoline tax shouldn't be raised, coming from the Midwest and knowing how difficult that is for somebody. But there are ways. I think that it's time to start to pay for the infrastructure through through the highway gas tax is one thing that hasn't been raised in so many years. I think there are things that we talk about as it relates to, and this may add back to the complexities, some of the sin taxes, whether it's tobacco tax. If you talk about either of those, you end up saying, well, wait a minute, that hits those people below 400,000, and therefore we have to take it off the table. I think that was a mistake. I think really, if you're talking about, let's streamline wishful thinking, I know at this point, but let's go back and let's eliminate a number of these credit subsidies that make the process complex. And let's go back and streamline it as we did in 1986, 87, in terms of the reforms that you and I remember back with the Senator Packwood and others who sat down and said, wait a minute, let's just clean this thing up and start out with a better slate and streamline the process and simplify the process. I think that's where we should. But as I say, it's a daydream today, because clearly that's not the way we're going. We're going to go again and focus on a select few who will admittedly should be paying more taxes from my perspective. I was curious as to see yesterday, of course, the great deal of discussion going back and forth about the billionaire tax. And I was also curious for the Tax Policy Center, I'll be curious to better understand the constitutional question that was raised about taxing that particularly select group of individuals. But I do think that we also have a distributional issue, and I would say that we can make the tax code a lot more progressive, and more of us, even those of us well below, and I can assure you, well below the 400,000, we should be making a better contract if we want to have these services that everybody seems to demand.
So, Bill, it's interesting that the definition of middle class seems to have become $400,000. In the Obama administration was $250,000, which I thought was strange. Now we're up to 400,000.
Yeah. And isn't the median family income out there about 58,000?
Yeah, somewhere in the low 60s. I think it's about 65,000. Yeah. So you're talking about, what is that? 7 times the median income, if my math is right. I mean, it's pretty strange.
Yeah.
The Democrats actually, I guess, have settled this morning on the idea of the billionaire tax is gone, and now they're talking about the idea of a surtax on people making more than $10 million a year. And it's interesting to me that what they seem to have done is come off the idea of making a few dozen mega rich people pay for this, and now it's people with $10 million of income or more, so it's maybe a few thousand of our close personal friends. But it's an interesting idea, and I wish there were more discussion about this, about whether or not society has an obligation to pay for these kinds of social programs. It's an interesting question. You and I have talked a lot about the idea of a public long-term care insurance program that would be funded with a payroll tax. That also ran into the same problem. That would raise taxes on people making less than $400,000. So it's a dead letter.
Exactly. And I do want to say that I'm probably, again, one of the outliers on this. I do think we do have a income distributional issue today. I do think that it got on this merry-go-round nearly 40 years ago, focusing on income inequality. And I think it has, at least the statistics I look at indicate that it has worsened. And so I do think there is some justification for looking at maybe something like that surtax on those with the up 0.2% of the population out there, as a substitute, as it was a substitute for the billionaire tax, I think, coming forward. But that's just one small segment, and as I say, that's a very small group of individuals who, even with that, I don't think will suffer. I'm not worried about them suffering their expenditures because they've been taxed a little more. I do think, though, that if we're going to talk about expenditures of social welfare expenditures, and again, I'm not opposed to a number of these provisions, particularly as it relates to home and community-based care that's in here. I think that's an important one. I think some of the expansions on Medicaid for those who have not been covered under the existing Affordable Care Act. I think I will lean a little bit toward the pre-K school. I was not a fan of free college. My wife's a junior college professor, and she says you pay for what you get, and she was worried about what you would be getting if you didn't pay for it. So at least on preschool and child tax credit and some of these issues in the housing area too, I think there are things that we need to invest in. I agree with the president and many in the Democratic caucus, even though I work for Republicans, that we have underinvested over the years. Now, at the same time, we're not willing to take on those particular programs that I think also should be reformed, which are in the entitlement area, such as even in the Social Security area. I shouldn't be getting, but I will be getting a 5.9% increase, I guess, come January in my little Social Security benefit. I shouldn't be getting that. I think there are things that we should also focus on in where we do have some of the social welfare programs, to retarget them more directly on those people who are more in need than, say, I am.
Mm-hmm. So, Bill, let me switch gears a little bit and ask you about another issue, which was a hot issue a few weeks ago, is now gone quiet. It will be a hot issue again in about a month. and that's the debt limit. How do we get out of this mess?
Well, it's a good question. First of all, here at the Bipartisan Policy Center, we've a little pretentious to say this. Many years ago, Jay Powell was a fellow here who helped us develop the little model that we continue to use in making these projections. And you're right. We're now have extended the debt limit to X date for default. We are careful not to say right now. I'm not going to say right now how long, but we'll hit this problem again sometime, maybe late December, maybe even into January or February now. But we'll wait and see on that. Long story short, how do we get out of this? Number one, I've had a proposal for many, many years, which is silly to think about. But when you pass a budget resolution, as the Congress did back in August, some people don't realize this, but on the face of that budget resolution, there is the debt limit number for the fiscal year 22. I've never understood. You've already voted on it, Congress. You've already told us what the debt limit should be. Why don't we just kick that out? Of course, a budget resolution doesn't become law. It's the joint resolution, but you could kick out immediately upon the adoption of a budget resolution that was set up this reconciliation process that we're going through. You could make it very clear that would kick out a piece of legislation that would be sent to the president immediately, and you've already voted on it, as I say. Longer term, quite frankly, I have got to the point where this is not it's been used. You and I know, Howard, we've been through this many years. I got on many years ago, and in 1985, when we were just raising the debt limit above $2 trillion, it precipitated a discussion about reforming the process. And out of that came the old Graham-Rudman-Hollings that was going to put us on a downward path. In 1990, 1995, 1997, 2001, Paul Ryan and Patty Murray worked on, again, the debt limit with President Obama and Speaker Boehner. And out of that came a discussion to set these caps on discretionary spending. It's always been used in the past, at least, to somehow reform the process or think they were reforming the process and controlling fiscal policy, the fiscal outlook. I think it's long lost its ability to do that. It's now become clearly a political tool. I would personally, if I was king, do away with it. Other industrial countries have. It is not serving. In fact, I would make the argument to my friend, the minority leader in the United States Senate, when he sent a letter to the president, said, "We're not going to give you any votes, Republicans. We're not asking for anything. We're just not going to give you any votes." Well, if you're not asking for anything, then why not just step out of the way? In the past, you have asked for things such as Graham-Rudman-Hollings, such as caps. It has lost its ability to have any impact, and I would simply, as I say, do away with it. It will not be done away with, unfortunately. It will continue to be used as a whipping tool, depending upon if you're in control or not control. But at a minimum, I would say there's a way that we can go back and say, upon the adoption of a budget resolution, you voted for it, let's increase it according to the budget blueprint that you have already adopted and start the process working with that way.
I trust you're not a fan of the $1 trillion coin.
No, sir, not at all. not at all. No.
So, Bill, let me ask you about deficits. You throughout your Senate career worked really hard to address the deficit problem. For a brief moment 2 decades ago, we actually had a balanced federal budget, and I remember you and I discussing what are we going to do with the surpluses.
Yes.
Now it's hard to find a single lawmaker of either party who really cares. What happened?
Well, I don't know. I still believe debt and deficits matter. I do think, in fairness, that in the times of recession, in times of war, in times of pandemic, that it's appropriate for the federal government to step in and to try to provide the stabilization that is needed at that time. I think where we made mistakes along the way were when we had the opportunity, when the country was growing. And I know I'm going to get in trouble by saying this. I'm not sure we should have had the 2017 tax cuts that came to pass. The economy was doing fine. Maybe there should have been some tweaks in some of the corporate tax provisions. But overall, when, as we used to say back on the farm, when the sun's shining, that's when you make hay. We were doing it. We were making progress. So let's be clear. Nobody likes to see their taxes go up. So we've ended up using it to reduce tax. We've reduced taxes or not increase taxes. And as a consequence, at the same time, with the changing demographics out there, the population aging, the entitlement programs that are on automatic pilot, as we've had the divergence between the expenditures versus the revenues coming in. There's something strange, and I know you've looked at these numbers, Howard, yourself over the years. There's something about 17% of GDP in terms of federal taxes. It just seems that we don't seem to want to get above that. It just seems to remain flat. And at the same time, where our benefits that we've already put on the record are growing. As a consequence, I think that is growing. The other problem here is some of us, maybe I'm guilty of this, have cried foul. You can't do this. You can't do this. You can't keep adding to the debt. It's gonna tank the economy. It hasn't happened. Maybe we've cried wolf too long and nobody believes us anymore. I still believe we've had part of the reason why we haven't been able to address this issue. It has to deal with the fact that interest rates have been so low. If those interest rates turn, though, as they are starting to turn here, then I think you're going to find, what is it, 0.1% will add about $300 billion to the deficit over the next 10 years. I think this deficit is a tax on our future generation. I won't be here. You may not be here long term, but it is a tax, and I think it does. I'll go to my grave thinking that we have created a problem for our future generations in terms of their economic well-being.
But it's interesting. I mean, people like Jason Furman have argued that we are in a period of secularly low interest rates, that things have changed. The world is awash in cash. And the argument that you and I have made for decades that the budget deficits crowd out private investment just doesn't seem to be true. So, I mean, does Jason have a point? Or are we in a period where interest rates are just secularly low because of broader changes in demographics and the world economy?
Yeah, I think Jason's a much better economist than I ever will be, but you're absolutely correct. I think we have a strange situation here where these low interest rates have created this phenomena that says we don't have to worry about the debt and deficits. I will say that at the same time, we have 50 states out there that most of them have a requirement that they have balanced budgets. And so, quite frankly, if deficits don't matter at the federal level, then I just wonder why we don't shift all the state expenditures to the federal government and run and do away with the states don't want to have to worry about meeting their requirements. I will, as I say, I'm just that much of a farm boy from Indiana still believes that whether you're a government, a business, a family, a university, a think tank, you should try to balance your expenditures with your revenues in the long run.
And I guess the problem, as you say, is that as long as there's no pain from high deficits, no rise in interest rates, there's no public support for making the decisions that politicians instinctively don't want to make.
And I think that's why it's interesting that in this particular package that the president has put for the Democratic caucus this morning is at least he still is of that school that we should be paying for our expenditures and not adding to the debt anywhere. So it may have cost a number of programs here that people wanted to expand, but at least I give him credit for the fact they are trying to pay for what they are talking about in terms of expanding expenditures.
Well, we're out of time. Bill Hoagland, thank you so much for taking time out of what has to be a really busy day. Yeah, it's always good to see you.
Good to see you, Howard. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to our audience.
Thank you.